Thank you all so much for being here with us today. It is good to be in community with all of you. For folks joining us from across the country, welcome. For all of those who are joining now, my name is Abby Hurst. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Director of Trauma-Informed Programs here at Everytown for Gun Safety, a leading national gun violence prevention organization. With people who've been personally affected by gun violence from across the country. We're joined with some members of our Everytown Survivor Network here today. But today I'm really looking forward to having a pretty candid conversation around the realities of gun violence in our country, about artistic expression, and what we all can do to create change on this issue of gun violence. So today during our conversation, we will be talking about trauma. We will be talking about grief. And we will be talking about, how gun violence shapes us and has changed our lives. And so just encourage everyone who's with us in this space to take care of yourself. Step away if you need to. We absolutely support you in doing that if you do need to. And before we jump into the conversation, I do want to acknowledge any survivors, anyone who has been personally affected by gun violence who has joined us today. It's very important that we recognize your own journey. And so what we like to do is we like to, honor your lived experience by writing the name of maybe your loved one who's been taken from you or changed by gun violence. Maybe it's writing your own name in the chat if you have witnessed gun violence, if you have been wounded by gun violence. So I want to take a moment to ground us in why we are here today by acknowledging the lived experiences of survivors and sharing of the names. So I'll pause, and if you have been personally affected by gun violence, if you wouldn't mind writing that name in the chat. Thank you, Marianne. We see Fred, Kenneth. Thank you. All right, and as the names come in, I do want to transition us to our first portion of today's conversation with two impressive, wonderful actors from the show Oklahoma. We're so honored to be in partnership with Oklahoma as, we've really been talking about gun violence and how it's represented in the play. And so to introduce our first two speakers, Sasha Hutchings and Christopher Bannow. Sasha, to begin, who plays Laurey Williams, has performed in other shows such as Hamilton, as My Fair Lady, as Rocky and Motown, as well as TV and film, including Hamilton on Disney+, The Bold Type, Jessica Jones, and Master of None, and many more. Welcome, Sasha. Thank you so much for being here. And we also...
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And we also have Christopher Bannow. Thank you, Christopher, for being with us today. Christopher Bannow, who plays Jud Fry, has performed in other shows such as The Elephant Man, Wolf Play, and The Hairy Ape, as well as TV and film, including The Three Christs, #Screamers, and David Chase's Not Fade Away, among many others as well. We are so glad to have you with us for this candid conversation as well, Christopher. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby.
So to start off this discussion today, I have a question for both of you, Sasha and Christopher. Sasha, we can start with you if that's all right in responding to this question. The first question is, why do you think the retelling of this story is relevant today, especially in the context of gun violence?
I think this story has been relevant and stayed relevant since it was first introduced into the American zeitgeist, and I think that's why you have certain shows like Oklahoma that are revived constantly, whether or not it's considered a retelling or a reimagining, which our show is. This show, it speaks to people, and it has for generations. With our show, I think there's a very deliberate choice to bring in bodies and faces and sounds that you don't typically hear in this story. everything from, again, like the backgrounds of and the lives and the bodies of the people on stage, but also the sound of the orchestra. You know, instead of having a full orchestra, we have a 7-piece band. The images you see are very different than what you would picture if you were coming into Oklahoma. And a lot of it is in service to uncovering cultural tensions that exist in tight-knit communities, or maybe just communities that have, you know, a lot of different people who want different things, which is like every community everywhere, no matter what. And I think that is what is most important about this production, is taking a familiar framework and introducing just unfamiliar, like introducing it in an unfamiliar way. And it really kind of scrambles your brain about what our story is. And I would say like ours being American. And then when we bring in gun violence, for me, something personally that just resonated was how much I can take the presence of guns for violence in my everyday life, or in like you know, a restaurant. I grew up in Georgia, and you know, gun culture, like sometimes you walk in somewhere and there's just, you know, this relic of a gun, and we have them hanging all over our stage. And throughout our experience with it, working with the prop guns and the training, I just you know, in tough ways have realized like how acclimated we are to this kind of, I would say, violence in our actual culture, but even effect in our dramatic culture. That this prop, this effect, this thing, it happens, and maybe Chris and I can speak more to it. But sometimes that's also harmful, and the fact that we have that pattern in the dramatic space was was sort of a revelation, and also like what it is in our real lives, like what we actually in our real world, how we're so used to them being around.
It's so true. Thank you so much, Sasha. Christopher, you want to share your response as well?
Yeah, I mean everything Sasha said, and I guess I'll clarify, or I'll say too that my only interactions with guns has been as a storyteller on stage and in film. I have no personal experience with guns in my life, so I'm speaking from this very specific place of, I would say, privilege. You know, I think with Oklahoma specifically, in this production, I mean, the story is about a territory joining the United States, about this territory becoming Oklahoma and what that means to become a part of this nation. And as we've been touring through the country, it feels like when we're singing Oklahoma, we could be singing America in a way. People have such a deep connection with this show, and it being this kind of representation of what being American means. And so I think it's really smart, and also just honest of our director to be like, well, if we're going to address what being American means, we have to address our relationship to guns, and how unfortunately our identity is tied to the presence of guns, the number of guns, and the amount of gun violence in this country. And so I think in this play we try and do something where we're not shying away from the fact that conflicts in this country often come to a head with the presence of guns, whether that's as a threat to stop violence from happening, or as a means to enact violence. And again, without changing a word of it, but just having the guns kind of line the walls of our theater. From the second that we walk on stage, you realize that it's always the presence of that threat is always here. It's always here when things are good. It's there, and perhaps people see that as comfort, but I think in this storytelling, it's always a threat that if anything goes wrong, there is a gun to grab, which again feels to me like an accurate representation of America today.
Wow, so much of what you just both shared. I'm feeling chills and reactions too, and I'm seeing other nodding of heads from other speakers too. Thank you so much. So Christopher, we're going to stay with you, if that's all right, to respond first to this next question, and then Sasha, if you want to follow up with anything. So in today's climate, in light of a lot of what you just shared as well, why is it important for storytellers to advocate from their values? Christopher, starting with you.
Yeah, I mean, there's a huge amount of privilege that I know I have in being a storyteller, and having that be my job, and then also a lot of responsibility and knowing that what we do can deeply impact those that come and see our stories. And I do have to say that that I think storytellers have a choice in addressing serious issues, and in addressing issues like gun violence, where to tell the truth to an audience is not always the easiest thing to do. And I think productions in general, to deal with guns in an honest way, where it's not either glorified in a superhero good guy way, and it's not also diminished in a this is really entertaining way. It's a fine balance to be like, it's neither neither less nor more than what it is. The mess of what it is should be represented on stage. And as an actor who handles guns, I truly try. And again, it's all because it's not based on my life, because I have no personal experience, but I try in the show to let the audience just experience what it is to be in a room with a loaded gun, and whatever reactions it gives them, not dress it up as being more or less than what it is. There's a lot of responsibility, and I don't take it lightly, and I'm honored that I get to be a part of telling this story 8 times a week with Sasha. Yeah.
Thank you, Christopher. Sasha.
It's important because I think storytelling is just, sometimes I think that's all there is. Like, we tell stories, we tell history, we record it, we tell it according to how we experienced it. And I would say, like, Chris, I was glad you brought that up, because I don't have any personal experience with guns or direct gun violence. It's the show, other than like living in America, and the reality of that. And if I was the only one telling stories, like my story, then it would be very different than those who come into contact with guns every single day, and how they come into contact with them, and how we tell those stories. That affects how we keep moving forward, and like how we address harm, how we continue to, or we perpetuate it, how we tell this, or we allow it to flourish. I look at storytelling not just as an actress. That is my job, but that's the job of so many people, to like really represent these pieces of life and tell it accurately, so that we can all live in like a reality. And I had this thought as like storytelling, and like when I was young, like storytelling is like, can be like, you're telling lies, like you're lying. You're telling a story, and we don't tell stories, we tell the truth. And so I think it's really important for artists and for people of integrity to tell stories that are according to their values. Hopefully those values are aligning with truth and justice and peace. And it's really important, because everyone's going to tell a story, and we need more people telling the truth.
I agree. So powerfully said, Sasha. Thank you. And as we kind of close out this portion of today's conversation, which I've already appreciated so much of what you've shared so far, Sasha, will stay with you, and then Christopher, if you want to respond to this last question for this portion. So in a sentence or two, what do you hope people take away from this updated version of Oklahoma? Sasha, with you, and then Christopher to close us for this portion.
I hope people leave with lots and lots of questions. I think that's the best thing you can leave this show with, is a disruption in what you thought something was that maybe you took for granted, in both good and bad ways. I think sometimes you can take the score for granted because you never heard that one lick on the mandolin the way that you'll hear it with our show. And I think that's a really special thing to take away and ask, like, what else is in this score that I'm missing? Then you can really start digging, like, what else is in this script? What else is in the culture? And then for me, I also think, what else is in my community? What else is in the relationships in my life that maybe I'm missing because I'm not asking enough questions? It's a huge direction in our show. Ask the question. Just simply ask the question. There's a lot of questions that get asked in this script. And sometimes it's hard to just honestly ask a question. But I think, like, what if you approach the rest of your life in that way, and like you approach the news that way, and you approach your your city that way, and your politics that way? You just really ask these questions without assuming anything, or working with preconceived notions that, quite frankly, have been very harmful to many communities. Like, many of the narratives in Oklahoma that we take for granted have been quite harmful to many communities. So I hope people take away questions.
I love that. And for anybody who's joined and is going to be seeing the performance, I love that tip, and hopefully you leave with lots of questions too. Christopher, closing with you for this portion.
Yeah, when people walk away, I hope that they, I guess similar to Sasha, I hope that they absorb the fact that there are things that are really celebrated in this culture and in this country that have been for decades and decades, and assuming that they should still be celebrated is for the same reasons is it's not healthy, and it's not reflecting kind of the truth of today. And I hope that when people leave the theater, they think, why did my grandparents and parents love this musical and sing along and smile? Because we haven't changed a single word of it. And the end result, I think, doing it today is quite different than doing it in 1943 or whenever it was written. So yeah, I guess piggybacking on Sasha's, just questions. Yeah.
Thank you both so much for being a part of this conversation, for sharing your perspective. It's meant a lot to me. And I'm really, I'm glad that we're able to also bring in other survivors to this conversation for this next portion of today's discussion. So I'm going to do a couple of introductions for our remaining speakers who are with us today, and then we'll jump into the questions that we have for them. Sarah Burdine is a Senior Survivor Fellow with the Everytown Survivor Network. She's joining us from Oklahoma, the state of Oklahoma, today. Sarah's firstborn child, Jean-Ciar Pierce, was shot and killed in Oklahoma City in August of 2012, just 5 months before his only child, Ciara, was born. Though we know that Ciara's murder remains unsolved, Sarah continues to fight for justice in his case, as well as in other cases, cold case homicides in your state of Oklahoma and in your region. And we want to bring Ciara in this space with us and honor him and honor you. And so we would like to say his name out loud together. Ciara. Salli Garrigan as another Senior Survivor Fellow, joining us from the state of New York. Salli was obsessed with theater in high school, from what she shared with me. And she was a high school junior at Columbine High School on April 20th, 1999, when 2 students went on a rampage, killing 13 people and wounding 24 others. Salli was in choir class at the time the shooting began. Salli, we honor your experience as a survivor as well. And so we say your name out loud. Salli. Pastor Brenda Mitchell is another Senior Survivor Fellow with the Everytown Survivor Network, joining us from the state of Illinois. Pastor Brenda's son, Kenneth, was shot and killed in 2005, 1 week after his brother, Kevin, left to fight in his 3rd tour of duty in Afghanistan. A single parent, her son, Kenneth, left behind 3 sons. Brenda has been advocating for gun violence prevention and healing from trauma since her son's death. And we honor Kenneth and honor you, Pastor Brenda, today. Kenneth. So the questions for the 3 of you to start, and then I have some specific questions for each of you that we'll get into shortly. But We'll start with Sarah and then Salli and then Pastor Brenda for this first question. Tell us about your journey, a little bit about your journey, about how gun violence has changed your life. Again, starting with you, Sarah.
Well, goodness, thank you, first of all, for having me, and thank you to the actors. Things that you said I wasn't expecting, and I'm so happy that you said them. So thank you for that. The journey has been an absolute roller coaster. Today I woke up knowing that I was going to do this call, and I had a good day. And in the call, it turned to, oh my gosh, I'm on this call because my son was killed. The sole reason for me being on this call. And I'd like to think I was a really well-rounded citizen and participant in my community, and just an overall good person and a great mom. And the fact is, I probably wouldn't have been on this call. I probably wouldn't have thought enough about what's going on outside of my household to be involved. So Sierra's death has thrown me head deep into the world of gun violence, into the world of homicides and unsolved cases and cold cases and frustration. I would have to say this is the most challenging thing I've ever gone through. I know every day when I wake up, gosh, I did it. Gosh, I did it. And I think daily Sierra would be so proud, like, keep going, Mom, keep going. But it's not what I want to be doing. It's not what I want to be doing at all. I want my son here. I want him to enjoy his only child, his daughter, Sierra. And you know, we can't have that. So it's a struggle. I think Sasha said this, that we have to just be transparent and be real. And in our storytelling, what I've learned since Sierra's death is that there is no pretty way to address this. There's no pretty way to address gun violence. There's no pretty way to address gun homicide, which I'm experiencing, my children, Sierra's siblings are experiencing. There's no pretty way. So the only thing to be, and the only way to tell the story is to be authentic. And this journey is it's horrible. It's absolutely horrible. The beautiful part of it is that I've met wonderful people along the way. I've met other survivors. Brenda and Salli are just two of them. I've, partnered with great organizations. And I know for myself, I could not have come this far to be on the call today if it weren't for other survivors saying, let's do this together. Let's absolutely do this together. You're not in this alone. We know over 100 people every single day are affected by gun violence. And that has brought me here. That this is the beautiful part of the tragedy of the story, is that there are other people that have just grabbed hold of me and said, we're not going to let you sink.
Beautifully said, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you, Abby.
Salli, over to you.
Thank you, Sarah. That was incredible. Again, this is why I'm here. It's for the other survivors as well. For me, I have to admit, the Columbine happened. At the time, it was an anomaly. And I trusted the adults, and I thought it would never happen again. And maybe because we were in such a microscope, the cameras were always on us. I had one more year after. I didn't want Columbine to define me after. And frankly, because I wasn't injured, I wasn't a survivor in my mind. So I continued on and kind of like suppressed it. And that's why I chose theater. So I did theater for a while to tell other people's stories. So it's funny, the actors talked about storytelling. For me, my outlet was telling other people's story. And it wasn't until I had my own kids, and then 20 years later, Parkland occurred, and their stories were so eerily similar to my own. But this time, they were speaking out. They weren't trusting the adults, and they were calling themselves survivors. And I finally realized that maybe I am a survivor, and my story mattered. Instead of telling other people's, maybe mine did matter. So now I'm here joining Moms Demand. It took me 20 years, but I joined, and now I'm part of the movement. That's where I'm at.
Thank you, Salli. Pastor Brenda.
Usually I'm pretty good at this, but I, like Sarah, kind of realized that I was going to be on this call today. and hearing their voices, it makes it difficult sometimes to translate, our expression based on our emotions and our feelings. And I think that, you as actors and actresses, do the same things. It's very hard sometimes to convey your emotions and your feelings based on your experience. Um, I had started with this, and I'll be perfectly honest about it. Being a part of this has saved my life. Um, Trauma became so important to me that, everyone was concentrating on the common sense gun laws, and I get it. And, we got great advocates that do that. But I realized that I, as a survivor, was still trying to survive. And impact does not necessarily come at point of death. It can come much later, which is what happened to me. Mine came 12 years after Kenneth's death, based on his children's experience, which I have. Um, they were 8 and 6 when their father was killed, and one had not been born yet. He was born 30 days after his father's death. And so I've had all of those emotions as a second generation parent, and as a survivor and a mother, as Sarah said, who wanted their child back, wanted what they could not get. And so I understood later, much later, the impact of trauma. And trauma was absolutely taking me out of here. And Abby had just heard this story a couple of months back. She never knew this part of me because there's so many different facets to it. But I learned to tell my story, and I've learned to experience the grief and the trauma, and allowed myself to navigate through it. But I also learned that self-care is huge in saving my own life as I minister and help others to understand complicated grief and trauma in our situations. And so I almost died 3 times from that 2012 to 2016, and primarily in the year 2016. But I learned to take all of that. And as a pastor, God gave me a vision in one of the meetings, not even in Illinois, in Washington, um, to turn this pain, this trauma, into miracles. And so I've shared my experience, and I'm very transparent, very humble, very humiliating at times, in sharing that even as a pastor. Um, in my communities, it's if God and I can't do it, it can't be done. But yet, He has made a way and provided provision. And I've showed others, if it happens to me, it can very well happen to you. I want to lead you to healing and restoration. And that is what is so important to me right now, that experience of dying and being afraid to go to sleep because you may not open your eyes in the morning, and yet you're relevant to everything that your son left behind. So I thank everyone for, and Abby really really made my voice in this platform of trauma to be heard and realized. So thank you, Abby, for that too. Sarah, I love you, and Allie, thank you for Salli. Just what we all bring and what we learn, and what people don't understand what we mean to each other is so huge.
It is. It's one of the most beautiful things about the work that I've been able to do with survivors over the past 6 years, is to see that love, like sincere love. It's a beautiful, profound thing. It's an honor to be a part of it. We're reflecting that love right back at you, Pastor Brenda, that you're sharing with us. So Brenda, we're going to stay with you actually to start the response to this question. And then we'll go to Sarah and then Salli. What are some of the things that you have found most healing on your journey? And I just also have to acknowledge the word healing from gun violence and from this trauma is even, people have different perspectives in the survivor community about healing as well. So Pastor Brenda, we'll start with you. What's been most healing for you in your journey? And then Sarah and Salli.
Okay. What's been most healing for me is to understand my own self, and dealing with self-care, and dealing with the triggers, and understand what allows you to move forward. I understood that I would never be able to receive a new norm because there is no new norm. And that kind of lies outside of what was normal for me. So there is no such thing as a new norm. And a lot of people go crazy trying to find that new norm that people tell them, oh, just wait, your new norm is going to come. It's never going to come. But what I did learn is to create a new narrative for myself that allows me to move forward and allows Kenneth to still be a part of where I am today. And I often tell people, don't put a period behind my son's name. He's still talking because his mom is still standing.
Yes, absolutely. Sarah, over to you.
Wow, Brenda just nailed it. It's stuff that I feel exactly. And for me, as Brenda said, there's not a time frame for healing either. You know, a lot of people have said, gosh, it's 6 years, 7 years, 8 years, 9 years, it's 10 years now. We just had the anniversary of Sierra's murder last month. And the way I look at it in my life, my life is a huge open wound. It's huge. And what I do instead of saying I'm healed, I just put Band-Aids on it. And that's okay. It's okay to cover it up. And some of the bandages are as much time as I can with my family. I have 2 surviving children. I have 2 grandchildren and 1 on the way. I spend as much time as I can with my family. I also, you know, I love my survivors, my survivor friends. I've had wonderful relationships, and they will be until I'm here no more. It's not just, you know, for today or for this call. No, we're in there, you know, for life. And that has been a huge Band-Aid over part of the wound. Another part has just been realizing I can tell this story. I can talk about Sierra and tell people about him, his life, his daughter, the crazy, goofy, silly, intelligent boy that he was, or young man that he was, that I can tell his story. And the first time I did it without crying, I'm like, there's a Band-Aid. I got to put a Band-Aid over that. So every day it's a different journey every day. Some days I can go a week and things are great. I have not had a breakdown, and something will hit, like today, you know, I'm doing this number. But it's realizing it's okay. Whatever you're feeling that day, it is okay. And that's part of the self-care for me. Not just taking time for myself and saying, you know, my mom has said this forever, that no is a complete sentence. It's okay to say no to people. It's okay to turn off my phone and not respond. It's okay just to say, guys, I'm tapped out. You know, I'm having a moment or a month or 2 months. I just can't do anymore. And that's so important, to be able to give yourself permission and not feel guilty about it. And one of the things, Abby, I go back, pardon me, I go back a long time on this journey, that the very first time I laughed after Sierra was killed, I remember laughing and thinking, oh my gosh, what am I laughing about? My child was killed. He was shot and killed. Wasn't an illness. As tragic as car accidents were, wasn't a car accident. Somebody murdered my child and I'm laughing. And I thought, good for me. It took me a long time, but I thought, good for me that I'm laughing. So I try to incorporate laughter as much as I can in my life. And I'm thankful that I have a whole pack of goofy kids and grandkids. So, you know, this house is really full of a lot of laughter now. And I know 100% this is exactly what Sierra would want us to do. Laugh and crack up. And his daughter's just as goofy as he was. And so every day, you know, it's a little bandages here. Sometimes the bandages are ripped off. You just place them and place them and place them. And the healing part is just telling the story, repeating his name. And as Brenda said, there's not a period after Sierra's name. It's Sierra was. And this is what Sierra's life did for me. And just being able to say his name every day, and any opportunity that I have to tell his story, I'm blessed to do that. That's part of my healing for sure.
Thank you, Sarah, and congratulations in advance for the new little grandbaby on the way. Oh,
Thank you.
So exciting. Salli, over to you for that question.
So for me, because I suppressed Columbine for a long time, I will tell you, ripple effects are real, especially in the community. There's been issues with our community with substance abuse, relationship issues. I'm just trying to let you know what does occur after a tragedy. And I think what I could tell you is do not suppress your feelings, that it's okay. I think we are 90s kids, so therapy seemed like the wrong thing to do. And it was probably what we needed most at the time. I wish there was something like Everytown at the time, then we'd have those resources. So now there are resources that can help others that maybe later in life didn't realize they were survivors. So I think it's healing to know there are resources, friends, and especially in the survivor network, the friends, and we just help each other, I think has been so healing. For me, since we are talking about Oklahoma, going to the theater has been so helpful for me to hear somebody sing a song or something of that nature. I was like, oh, that's the feeling I was feeling for so long. And somebody just did that in a song. It was so important to me. And like Sarah said, humor is the key, and friends and family. Those are my kind of where I look to healing. So it's important. Don't suppress things is I think my takeaway.
Thank you for your candor too, and in sharing about your own journey, and some wisdom about what people can consider for their own journeys as well. So the last question for all three of you, and then I'll share the individual questions that I have for each of you. Salli, we're going to stay with you to start off with the response. What are some of the ways that people have been most helpful to you in your journey, for your family or your community? I know that in my experience working with survivors and my own grief journey as well, sometimes people don't know what to do and then they don't do anything at all, and that can be really harmful. So we'll start with Salli and then Pastor Brenda and Sarah to respond to this question. What has been most helpful to you that other people have done?
I think I'll keep mine short. Checking in. I think you can hear the worst story, or like, how can anybody, like, what do I even have to say to them? And honestly, just checking in and being like, thinking of you. How are you? I'm here. Let me know what I can do. And I think that's the most important thing, is just checking in with each other and having that network to always make sure you can be honest with them and check in. It's just key. Just check in, because if you're not checking in, I think unfortunately, as we've learned through Columbine, there are a lot of suicides afterward. Mm-hmm. So just always check in.
Thank you, Salli. Pastor Brenda.
Great, that's great. I think the thing for me, because in the family on both sides, I have always been identified as a strong person. Still am, but what I had to teach them in this process was how to approach me and how to allow me to be fragile. When I realized that I was fragile, I took advantage of my fragility and I shared it with them. And I shared, I cannot help anybody until I can help myself. Please allow me this space in order to come back to where I once was. I did not see myself anymore. And I felt like I was locked in my own mind because there were so many emotions and so many things happening with me. And yet other people kept pressing on into that space that I was trying to identify what that space was. And the space was fragility. And I accepted it, and I moved out of the strong tower mentality and became fragile and moved toward my healing process.
Thank you, Pastor Brenda. Sarah?
With mine, I'll tell you, Abby, I felt like I floundered for a really long time, just floundered. And I have a big family here in Oklahoma City, my mother and 4 brothers and, all the in-laws and nieces and nephews. And even within my own family, I thought, gosh, we're not talking about Sierra. We're avoiding his name. And we have get-togethers all the time with the whole family. And I said that one time, I said, why isn't anybody talking about my child? You're acting like, he was the first grandson from my family. And I said, you're acting like he didn't exist. And everyone said, we thought you were having a good day and we didn't want to upset you. Big conversation after that, real big and necessary conversation. Please say his name. If I'm having a bad day, that'll make me feel better. If I'm having a good day, it'll make me feel better. Say his name. And thankfully, my mom has just been a rock. Of course, my children have been wonderful. It was difficult continuing to raise my children with this tremendous grief. How do I not mess them up? How do I get through this and not mess them up? My mother has been instrumental. God love her. She'll be 90 next month. And she has been instrumental in not letting me go. And one of my brothers calls every other day. It's wonderful. And our key is, you want some pie? Do you feel like pie today? So he'll say, do you feel like pie? And if I'm in a bad mood, not today. And if I'm in a good mood, we'll go, grab a bite to eat or something, or we'll just, get together and laugh. But every other day for 10 years, he has called me, and it's been wonderful. And they got me to the point that I could then go to a grief support group, and that I could, get involved with advocacy and other survivors. So my family has been absolutely instrumental. And then since I got to the survivors and meeting more and more, they have been just my lifeline. Appreciate them so much.
Thank you, Sarah. And now I also want pie. I really appreciate you sharing that that dynamic between your brother as part of your support system, and that authenticity in your relationship. That's beautiful. And Sarah, we're going to stay with you for these individual questions, and then we have a question for all of the speakers to respond to if they feel moved to. So Sarah, what are some of the ways that you've seen survivors of gun violence heal during your work? You've talked a lot about your own journey. It's been so profound for us to hear your journey, but what have you seen in others as well?
Sure. First of all, I apologize for all the coffee. My allergies are ridiculous here in Oklahoma. So I'm sorry, guys, but I've seen wonderful things. I have so many survivor friends that have run for office from anywhere from the school board to city council. One of my dear friends is running for a congressional seat here in Oklahoma. It's the advocacy work that I see them not shying away from, stepping up and not shying away from, let somebody else deal with this. They have just come forward and been really, really strong and instrumental. And then I have other friends that cannot, because of their personality and their choices, they just cannot be that type of person, but they are the best huggers. They're saying, I'll come with you. I'm not going to talk. I'm not going to speak. I can't do anything. I'm not going to knock doors, phone call, but I will hug and I will support you in anything you do. I've seen people that have set up foundations and scholarships and, have walks of remembrance. I have seen such wonderful things out of tragedies, and it amazes me every day. And I think, I can do this. Everything is always reflected back to, oh my gosh, I can do this. A scholarship in Sears' name, I need to put one together for next year, from his graduating high school. I would love to do that, but they have stepped up in so many different ways. I'm so proud of how creative people have been and the action that they've taken. And this mother and daughter that I know that will be there, and every time I ask them to show up and just to hug me and say, I support you, and I'm supporting you by physically being here to hug you. So it's been wonderful to see all the changes and to see the things that I might be able to do in the future too. It's very, very inspiring.
Oh, yes, I see. Maybe running for office in the future, something that's so exciting, Sarah. And it's so true. Everyone's journey is their own, and that's okay wherever they are in that journey. Pastor Brenda, I have a question for you, and then Salli, I'll come to you with your question. So Pastor Brenda, we know that there is a ripple effect of trauma for every act of gun violence. You and I have had many conversations about this over the years. So what resources are available to communities to move forward or to respond to the trauma that they've experienced?
I've been very forthcoming in the movement to move toward resources. Everytown Survivor Network and Moms Demand Action is probably the largest organization that's out there that is at the center of meeting the needs of survivors, as well as the advocacy work, changing the gun laws, making sure that we're represented appropriately in Washington, as well as on the local level. And they've been very good at that. And people getting involved, getting engaged, and just having us out there as ambassadors to know what's out there. In 2005, there was nothing there. I had to learn to heal by myself, which is probably why it took so long for me to reach the point of impact. Impact happened in 2012. Others don't have to wait until 2012 to receive, validation that you're hurt. You have a wound that can never be healed. We're like the walking wounded. we don't have to be the walking wounded anymore. You know, we have resources available to us through Everytown and other community-based organizations that are out there as well. We're not selfish in what we do, and we do extend ourselves to other organizations that there's power in numbers. We understand the representation and the power that comes in numbers, be it Everytown Survivor Network, Moms Demand Action, and the other like groups that we partner with when it's necessary for all of our voices to be heard and to be there front and center. If that makes sense.
Oh, of course it does. Thank you. Not only does it make sense, but
And, you know, and let me just say, I share with what Christopher said as well, to resonate through our values. The story may be, you know, difficult to tell, but it still needs to be told nonetheless. And in art, the picture may not be pretty, but it's already been painted. We'll live with it.
thank you, Pastor Brenda. Yes. Salli, question for you. And then we have a question for all the speakers to close. How can people get involved in the movement to end gun violence? I know that you shared your own journey of the time that it took to get to that place, but if someone's on the call today or in this session and wants to get involved, how can they?
So Mom's Demand is a great one. I would say text JOIN to 64433, and we'll even put it in the chat or on a part of this, but that's the best way to go. Somebody will respond and help you get started. There's a chapter in all 50 states, and I think there's about 700 local groups, and they consist of moms, not just moms, even though it's Mom's Demand, moms, dads, students, gun owners, concerned citizens, and gun violence survivors, and from all over the country. And it's all walks of life, and it's a really, really warm and welcoming community. Even if you wait a long time before you join, I can tell you they open up their arms for you. Yeah, I think that's the best way to start, and they can help you and you can do as much as or as little as you need to do, but you will have the resources like Brenda talked about.
Thank you so much, Salli. And I know as we have these conversations about the hardship and the trauma and the grief of gun violence, we also know it's so important to talk about hope, to have that bright light of hope in these dark hours and in our dark moments. And so the question that I have for all of the speakers today, any of you who feel moved to respond to this question, is what gives you hope that we can end gun violence? So Sasha and Christopher as well, please feel free to respond. There isn't a particular order, but I'll pause to see who would like to respond to what gives you hope.
Abby, I'll go.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Salli.
No, you can go ahead. Why don't you go?
Well, I was just going to say, what gives me hope are conversations like this. Sadly, anytime there's, generally when there's a very public tragedy, then these conversations are started again. Last night on our 6 o'clock news here in Oklahoma City, we had a double homicide. At the 10 o'clock news, we had 3 people were shot at a different location, and an Arby's employee was shot at a fast food restaurant 3 miles from my house. So from 6 o'clock until 10 o'clock, a double homicide, 3 people were shot, and a murder at an Arby's. The conversations have to happen. I love that Sasha said, ask the question. So I'm like that, ask the question about how to prevent this. How do we stop this? How do we curb it? Ask about individual stories. I'm always honored when someone says, tell me what happened to Sierra. Don't shy away from these conversations. Don't say, well, I don't want to upset her. Gosh, how am I going to ask her how her son died? Where was he shot? I will give you as much information as you ever want to have on that. It's such a wonderful time and such an opportune time to keep these conversations going and gather. Gosh, if everyone would just bring 3 friends to each call, to each group meeting, and just keep this momentum going. I am convinced. I'm convinced that we can end this, that we can end, you're not going to have moms and students and fathers and grandparents and siblings and children who are fatherless or motherless because of tragic gun violence. I fully believe that it starts with conversations, and I know that we can end this. I just, my hope is all into this, that we can end this, but it starts with the very, very basic conversations about it.
Thank you, Sarah. Salli, it sounded like you were going to respond as well.
No, it's she said it all. But honestly, I think we're all learning we can't just be passengers in all of this. And even through after seeing the revival of Oklahoma, it was great. It was because I was almost like, good on them. I think you're seeing in shows, it just gets more raw. It gets real. And I think that's important all over. We need to feel how real and how heavy all of this is. So I think we need to get involved. And even there's been some bipartisan movement. So I think it's getting real for everyone.
Thank you, Salli. That gives me hope as well. Pastor Brenda, I saw you go off mute.
Yeah, I think the thing that gives me hope is the fact that, 30 years, we look to see gun laws change. And in one moment, in one incident with Uvalde, we saw the president invite people that have been on the front lines of this movement to pass a Safe Communities Act. And even though we passed the act and maybe about 4 days later, we saw the incident, the mass shooting in Highland Park, we didn't rest on our laurels. We're now looking at moving toward the assault rifles ban, which they would not put in that piece of legislation, but we're not through. And so the hope is that we still remain present and we still remain not a marathon, but a movement.
Thank you, Pastor Brenda. Well, I also feel that conversations like today really do give me hope. I am so honored that I get to be continually inspired by the survivors in our network, to build relationships with you, to see you really stand in your own power and be on the front lines of change in our country. It's a tremendous honor. Thank you all to our speakers today. It really was such a pleasure to hear from you and to be inspired by all of you. Sasha and Christopher, thank you for your art. Thank you for everything that you are doing. Thank you for being a part of this conversation. Salli, Pastor Brenda, Sarah, thank you for being so open with all of us and giving us the gift of understanding and learning from your own journeys. We also want to thank Oklahoma and Bond Theatrical for partnering with us on today's discussion and creating this forum for all of us to speak together. And so in closing, I just want to encourage everyone to continue asking the questions as Sasha shared with us earlier, to continue to these conversations and continue to explore ways to end gun violence, because it really will take all of us. Thank you all. Please take care of yourselves and be well.